The G spot. I'd hit that.
Welcome to the Gi Spot podcast. My name's Rachael Bradshaw and I have a black belt in Jiu Jitsu.
Hello, I'm Kaz Page. And look, I've put my microphone way out of the way. Look at me go. It's going to be one of those days, right? It's going to be one of those days. I'm Kaz. I've got a purple belt in Jiu Jitsu and we're back.
We are back.
Hooray!
Yay!
Welcome to the front line again.
How are you?
Yeah, you know. So it's a bit of a hit and a miss at the moment. So as we know, I'm back doing more tests around the neck and there's ongoing issues and I'm off the mats again. So, you know, everybody reach out and give me lots of love because I'm very sad pandering at the moment.
Well, today's a very timely episode then.
I know, right? I get to ask a billion gazillion questions and find out how I can get back onto the mats really quickly.
I think that's a great idea. Let's jump straight in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Go for it.
All right. So without further ado, we would like to introduce a very special guest with us here today. We have none other than Dr. Kickass himself, Mike Piekarski. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome to Australia. So to speak. Have you been here before ever?
I have not. My wife has been to Australia. She actually studied abroad there, so she keeps wanting to move there because she loved it so much. But
that's a great idea.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to move to Australia, though. I think they make it very difficult.
Yeah, sometimes they can. I guess sometimes it can also depend on who you are. So given your credentials that we're about to dive into, you might actually have a gold ticket to be able to come on across the pond. So, Mike, first and foremost, I'd like to know, where did Dr. Kickass come from?
So it was originally a joke because, like, when I played I'd be like play video games in college, you know, I'd make up a handle of like Captain Kickass. It was just like a handle I used to joke around with. And then, you know, fast forward, you know, I'm in physical therapy school and I was like, you know, I made a joke that I'm now graduating from Captain to Dr. Kickass. And then, you know, when I decided to create my Instagram, you know, originally I was like, at the time I was like, I have kind of a very self-deprecating humor. So I was like, do I want to have something like more serious or do I want to run with Dr. Kickass because it's ridiculous? And then, you know, so I started with Dr. Kickass and then my page started to grow. And then I was trying to decide if it would make me less credible by keeping it. But then I decided that it's too memorable to get rid of, so I just ran with it, and here we are.
It's pretty cool, I will say. Like when I was mentioning to you off air, we had a friend of ours on who's a doctor as well, and he was telling us about you. And Dr. Kickass just sounded real cool.
Yeah,
like,
it does.
I've got to do further investigation on this guy.
You're not going to forget that. You know when people tell you things and you're like, oh, who was that person again?
Yeah, I have way too many children, so I'm useless with names. But Dr. Kickass, I can remember no problems at all. So I found you every time.
So if physical therapy just doesn't work out for you, marketing might be the way to go.
Maybe the next calling.
Good to know.
So speaking of that, and obviously, you know, joining us here on the Gi Spot is around Jiu Jitsu, but one of the things that happen in this sport, in this martial art, a lot are injuries. And so having you here today is very significant because, as you mentioned before, and Rachel's just said, you do have a background in physical therapy.
Yes, correct.
So tell me about that. What made you decide as a young whippet that you're going to go and do a Doctorate of Physiotherapy?
So originally, so I started with Jiu Jitsu. I'd been doing Jiu Jitsu for a long time before that. I was thinking about trying to become a professional mixed martial artist. After my first fight, you know, I made $600 and I got a broken nose. And then I started thinking maybe this isn't a good long-term career option.
Fair.
You know, because if you look at the people who are successful in MMA, you know, there's the people that are very dedicated, but they're also very, very good natural athletes, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of realized that I didn't have the athleticism to really get to the UFC. So, you know, was it worth to try to, you know, get these lower level shows and make like a little bit of money, you know, and I'd been around enough MMA gyms where I could see those type of people where, you know, they had okay records. They just weren't good enough to get in the UFC. And, you know, they didn't really have a good quality of life. So So then I was like, well, what other options do I have? And, I thought about opening a jiu-jitsu gym, but at the time I was living in like upstate New York, and I really didn't like the place that I lived. It was, it was just very boring. And I was like, well, if I open a gym, I'm pretty much stuck here for the rest of my life, because it's not that you have to, but to sell a jiu-jitsu gym is not easy, right? So then I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I started looking into personal training. But at that time, I had no background in personal training. Like, I was a purple belt and I taught jiu-jitsu. But, and again, to be a personal trainer, you have to be a very good marketer, which at the time I wasn't. Maybe now I'd be a little bit better. Because essentially you have to like sell yourself, right? And so what happened was I applied to a job, and it was like a physical therapy assistant. So in the US, there's physical therapists, it's now a doctorate level degree. If somebody was already a licensed therapist, they would get grandfathered in. But at some point, all physical therapists had to be doctors. But there's a lower level degree called a physical therapy assistant, which is an associate's degree. At the time I was like, so I applied for a job, and then I realized that I actually needed a degree in the certification. And so I was thinking about going that route, but the problem was it's a 2-year degree that does not transfer. So I could, if I wanted to become a physical therapy assistant and then later change my mind, it isn't like an additional year. It's like, you have to jump right back in. So it was kind of weighing do I want the independence versus the debt? And I realized I don't like listening to rules. So I went with the physical therapy route.
You're in very good company here. I'm thinking about the few things that you've said right now, and I think you're my husband's twin from another parent.
So how old were you when you made these decisions?
So I was 25 when I decided I want to apply to PT school. I had to take about a year and a half of prereqs because I already had a bachelor's degree, but I needed to take like chemistry, physiology, anatomy, so that took me a bit. So I started PT school 27, and then I graduated as a entry-level PT at 30.
So you already had done an undergrad?
Correct.
What had you done your original undergrad in?
Psychology and history. So initially I thought I was going to get a PhD in psychology, but I waited until my senior year to get into a lab to do psych research, which I thought was going to be interesting. And I realized it was insanely boring, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. But that was also interestingly around the time that I found jiu-jitsu, because I found it in college. So, then I was like, what can I do that lets me train jiu-jitsu? So I just, got a job, allowed me to train. But you imagine, again, I'm making peanuts at this point until I decided to go and actually get a real degree.
Yep. Okay.
It's amazing when people insert jiu-jitsu into their lives, how suddenly everything else needs to be repositioned around how it's going to fit jiu-jitsu.
Every holiday in the last 11 years, I have planned around jiu-jitsu schools around the world. We have only gone to locations where we can train. And luckily for us, that's a lot of locations. But every holiday has been planned around jiu-jitsu. So take us back to the beginning of jiu-jitsu. How old were you when you first discovered jiu-jitsu on its own merits without MMA?
So I was 20, so I was in college. So I dabbled with some martial arts when I was like a teenager. I had a knee surgery that they don't do anymore because the outcomes, they don't really do it because the outcomes are pretty poor. It's called a lateral release. So I had an unstable kneecap. My kneecap was out of place. But I was like 15 at the time, so I didn't take rehab as seriously as I should have, especially with what I know now. Ultimately, it didn't work. I needed surgery. The surgery has really poor outcomes because people develop really poor quads, because essentially what they do is they cut some of the retinaculum along the patella, which means that one of my quad muscles, my vastus lateralis, which is my outside quad muscle, doesn't have the same amount of pull, which means that the muscle atrophies. So even to this day, one of my quads is significantly weaker than the other. I just learned how to compensate around it. So I tried some Japanese jiu-jitsu when I was a teenager, but I had to stop because of the surgery, and then once I got into college, my knee was good enough where I could do something. In hindsight, I don't know if it was, but so then I'd done some Japanese jiu-jitsu. There was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu club, and I was like, well, this is probably going to be pretty similar. So I was 20 at the time, and then I found Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then I realized everything that I'd learned in Japanese jiu-jitsu was a complete waste, and what I was looking for was this.
Okay. So you're 20. Are you in New York at this point, and this is where you find Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. And so is that, you were saying before that you went through to purple belt and you started coaching. Did you stay with the same coach all the way through to black belt in New York?
No. So I went to purple belt through one coach. When I got into PT school, physical therapy school, I moved to Long Island, New York. So it was like 4 hours away.
Okay.
So then I had a different coach who promoted me to brown belt. And then once I graduated physical therapy school, I moved to Los Angeles, and then I got promoted to black belt from a different instructor.
Okay. And are you still with that instructor today?
Well, sort of, because like once you're a black belt, like you don't really like need to be with the same instructor. Cause I mean, we were together when I was in LA. I moved to Sacramento. I've since moved to Washington. He moved to Vegas. So, I guess, like I said, I don't like listening to rules. Like once you're a black belt, you can kind of do whatever you want. So I am still on good terms with the person who promoted me, but like I wouldn't say he's like my active instructor because he doesn't really teach me anymore. But for jiu-jitsu, I feel like I've, especially in the last year when I've been 100% coaching myself, I feel like I've had the most growth in my almost 20 years of jiu-jitsu.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So coaching yourself, how are you doing that? In what environment are you doing that?
So in addition to being a physio and content creator, like I still teach jiu-jitsu. So I teach jiu-jitsu 3 days a week as well on top of that. Mainly I teach jiu-jitsu because one, I do it for free because I love it. But two, coaching I feel gives you a better understanding of jiu-jitsu. So, before I was really coaching, and I think a lot of practitioners do this, is I would say they don't have a good fundamental understanding of what they're trying to do in jiu-jitsu. They just have a collection of techniques. Yeah. So something happens and they're just throwing technique A, B, C, D, and then it stops working. Versus when you're actually teaching, you kind of have to boil it down. So it's like from this position, like what am I really trying to do? So once I really boiled it down and then I can break it down for my students, it's for me better at understanding what I have to do, right? Because I'm kind of like breaking it down. And then also I feel that being my own instructor means that I have to be more aware of how I want to improve. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to, I would say it took me, I think 12 or 13 years to get my black belt. During that time, I was fighting MMA and I was going to physical therapy school. So I did have a few things in the way, but I would say in my early career around purple belt, something that slowed me was that I became very reliant on my instructor's coaching. So he would tell me to do something and I would do it, but I didn't really develop that self-autonomy, which ultimately I think is where you can really progress. I think the people that progress really fast take it upon themselves, which is something that I did more recently.
I think that's a perfect level at which you start doing that at purple belt in that way that you know the fundamental side of jiu-jitsu, and then suddenly you're sort of seen to be that more senior student on the mat and people are looking to you and they ask you questions. So it starts to plant that seed of, oh, okay, well, if people are asking me questions, it's going to make me think more deeply about what I actually do. And then explaining that to other people is where you get this whole new understanding of what and why you actually do something. So when you're teaching jiu-jitsu now, give your gym a shout out. Where would we come and visit you if we were in the area?
Sure. So I train in Pullman, Washington, which is a tiny little college town in eastern Washington. We're on the border of Idaho. And the gym is, like I said, V7. And, I teach 3 days a week.
And that's Washington State, not Washington, D.C. too, just for clarity.
Right.
On the West Coast, not the East Coast.
Yeah.
We've talked quite a bit about the differences between being a student and being a coach. And, for me, I'm neurodivergent, and Rachael has a couple of times asked me to take the women's class. And for me, being able to immerse myself in something that I want to give to somebody else has been hugely, significant for me, because my depth of understanding of it takes on a whole new level. So I think, for neurotypicals and neurodivergents, I think that is a really powerful statement as well. But also the self-learning component, I think, is something very interesting, because, Rach, you made a comment a couple of episodes ago about there is so much information out there. Everybody's got a video, or everybody's got a tutorial on how to, and a YouTube channel, and this and that and that. How do you differentiate between good and bad?
I guess that's so for me, what I try to do is, so there has to be a problem, right? So as I'm rolling, there's some type of problem. And one of the things that I try to do is I try to put my students in situations where I have a problem, right? Because, I could just, roll up all my students and tap everybody and feel super cool, but I'm not getting better at jiu-jitsu. So I'm trying to use that as an opportunity for me to develop. So then once I run into a problem, then I kind of look at where can I get that answer, right? Because like you said, if there's like 100 people showing an armbar, why am I going to go to this one person versus, if I have a very specific problem? And one of the ways that you can do that is obviously competition if they're a competitor, right? Like if you see someone do something like, oh, I run into this problem all the time, how do they do it? But again, sometimes it's a little bit more challenging because there's many instructors out there that aren't necessarily good competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
And one of the things, Grant always says, but I live by it as well, is that when techniques are used at the highest level with the highest of levels, that's when you know it's going to be a good technique. When it's, used for gym taps or on white belts or whatever, or it's more of a choreographed sequence that you see on Instagram and things like that these days. That's when you go, oh, that looks really cool. Let me try that. No, that didn't work. Or maybe that has potential. So sometimes, you get the opportunity to be creative when you get, become a coach and you have a lot of students to sort of play with, in the academy, where you can start to experiment a little bit more. And I find with me that, when I'm teaching, someone might ask me a question, oh, why did you do it that way? And I had never even thought about it even myself, why I do something a certain way. And it makes me think about it. And then my level of understanding of why I even do something becomes even deeper. So it's really cool. I love coaching. It's one of my favorite parts of jiu-jitsu is coaching.
She does like it when she's coaching.
And to build off what you say is I agree. Someone asks me a question, I answer, and I'm very clear when I answer a question, be like, this is how I do it. I explain why I do it.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, like, they could go to you show something different. Maybe they like what you do better, which is fine, because your jiu-jitsu could be different from my jiu-jitsu, which is different from your jiu-jitsu, right? That's just what's cool. There's no one answer. It's kind of like what works for you.
It's a melting pot.
Yeah, well, and because bodies change so differently, and male versus female, larger versus smaller, there's so many different dynamics in it to take into consideration. Yeah. Mike, tell me, you said that you started jiu-jitsu before you started your PT career path. How did your focus, your awareness around jiu-jitsu change the more you learned and dived into your career as a physiotherapist?
Well, so it was interesting. So especially at the time, because, I graduated from PT school in 2015. So it's been about 10 years now. So the combining the two didn't really exist. Like there was no jiu-jitsu physical therapy at the time. So I just thought that I'm interested in this. I thought there was enough of an overlap. Like you said, jiu-jitsu people get injured all the time. I'm kind of interested, and then once I started to actually work as a physical therapist, I was like, well, I like working with jiu-jitsu people. So, people from my gym would come to see me. So then it started to grow. And then I realized I had this kind of unique knowledge, because at the time, and now there are more black belts that do jiu-jitsu, but at the time there was virtually none. Right. So, so then I started to push that. And then really it was my Instagram account that really pushed me in the research sense, because what happened was something would happen and I'm curious. I'm like, well, why did that happen? So I initially started, I would do joint lock breakdowns when an armbar happens, what's actually being damaged. So I had that question and then I would research it. But then what would happen is I did that for, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years, and I had accumulated all these very sport specific things. But again, for me, it started with, I had a question because I wanted to know the answer. But the more that I looked into it, I kept getting more and more. And, I just kept going with that. I would say one of the things that did change, it was kind of like a good phase, because I went from, that adult competitor to like the masters competitor, and obviously things are a little bit different. And then I started getting a little bit more aware of injuries and, maybe some ways that I would have to modify my style slightly just for longevity. But they kind of evolved simultaneously.
So in all of your history, 15 years post, qualifying with your degree and working in the industry now and still pursuing a jiu-jitsu career, if you were looking at, you have 3 people standing in front of you. You have a 20-year-old, you have a 40-year-old, and you have a 50-year-old.
What about the 30-year-old?
Wow, they're like blue belts, right? They know everything and know nothing all at the same time. Oh, that was cool. I amuse myself sometimes. Okay, so you have the 20-year-old, the 40-year-old, and the 50-year-old all standing in front of you, and they're all about to embark on a jiu-jitsu journey. Is there a different message for each of them, or would you give them the same message in regards to longevity? How do you stay on the mats long term?
I mean, I'd probably give them the same message, but it's more meaningful for obviously the older person. So overall, when you're on the mat, skill development is different than winning the round. Too often you go to class, people are trying to win the round. They want to get to the tap. They don't want to get tapped. But if you're in a gym, like, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, you should be focusing on skill development. Yeah. And especially as an instructor, the more that I see that, like, I mean, I can see like the people who get better. And I went through that phase because I was that, in my 20s blue belt who's just trying to tap people. And that was also when I stalled out. So I'm like, why am I plateaued? Because I'm not getting better, right? Mm-hmm. So 1, you should be focusing on skill development. That's much more a meaningful metric. 2, not tapping does not stop the injury. So someone can put you in armbar and you don't want to tap, but now you're pretty much hoping that your training partner is going to be nice, right? Which is, sometimes they will, but also if that's the case, it kind of gives you this false self-confidence. Like, the only reason you didn't get tapped was because they didn't try to break your arm, which isn't a good defense, right? Yeah. So now if you're a competitor, you in that same situation, you're going to get your arm broken. So, there was I was listening to a video of Roger Gracie saying, like, not tapping is really stupid. Like, and he himself had never let himself get injured by not tapping. And you look at Roger Gracie, 10-time world champion, arguably one of the best jiu-jitsu guys ever. If he says tap in the gym, pretty much no other jiu-jitsu person alive has should have any negative feelings about tapping.
Yep.
It just, and then think of it this way, right? So like, as you're working on skill development, so like, you could take your A game, I'm a black belt, so there's things that I have a black belt level in, but then there's things that I'm not black belt in, there's different things. So as I'm adding that, if I'm going with a purple belt, but I have like a blue belt level skill, it might not work, which means I might get tapped, and that's okay. Like, so for me, once I stopped caring about me personally getting tapped, like, again, I feel like my jiu-jitsu's gotten a lot better because then I could focus on getting better at jiu-jitsu.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
And we have had just, beginning of the year and new year, new me and all that sort of thing. But February is always our largest growth period in Australia for jiu-jitsu students coming in. And so we've got all these amazing demographic of about 20-year-old young guys that have just all started at the same time, which is awesome because it's fresh blood in the academy. They're really invigorated, they're really motivated, and it's like 2 cats in a blender when they decide to go together on the mats and train with each other. And the other night, Coach was saying to the room at Bow Out, is like, you guys, we want you on these mats and we want your longevity to be here in a year's time. But the way that you're rolling with each other right now, one of you is going to get injured.
Yep.
So you need to relax. You need to think about the technique, as little as you have right now, because they've only all been training a couple of weeks. But it's such a hard message to try and convey to young minds.
Lowly. Everybody go lowly.
So, it's interesting you say that, because where I live, it's a college town. So we had a lot of college students. So there's a lot of those young 20-year-old college kids, just like what you said. So, it was interesting because there was a guy who used to teach some of the classes before me, and he was ex-military, and he would kind of like push them to be like more meathead like. So it was a turnoff to a lot of people, because people describe it as like a testosterone fest, and then which is funny, because like for me, like I don't care, like I don't need to prove myself, even though I was been that other instructor. I've been doing jiu-jitsu longer than him. So, I take over and I'm kind of trying to change the environment.
Yes.
And one of the things that I tell people is, when you have someone in front of you, so I'm a black belt, and I don't necessarily get a lot of black belts to train with. I just, it's a rural town. So how can I optimize my training for the person in front of me? So if I have a 40-year-old woman who's a white belt, how can I make that training worthwhile for me? And so, because I could just try to like go and tap her like 10 times, but again, that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help me, doesn't help her. But what can I do? So it's you take your training part in front of you, and how can you get the most out of your time? So, and that's another thing that I encourage people, because there'd be these young 20-year-old guys, and they're like face cranking, these moms. I'm like, dude, like, you really,
yeah, been there, had that done. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, like, so like, so it's like, well, how can we get the most out of our training? So thinking about that way, if I can get that message across, get them to calm down, because again, there's a point where like you can train, and sometimes I'll wear a heart rate monitor. I can see how hard I'm going. And I don't necessarily need to be redlining the whole time, because really when I'm doing jiu-jitsu, my goal is to use as little energy as possible to accomplish my goal. So if I can use no effort and I can pass a guard, why would I use more effort? It doesn't make any sense. That's how, I mean, one of the ways that I would define a black belt is like I'm flow rolling with someone who's not flow rolling, and I can still do whatever I want to them.
You put a post up a little while ago about jiu-jitsu not being the cardio art form. Talk to us a little bit about that, because that's just kind of alluding to what you just said then, that the point of the art is technique.
Yeah, so, I mean, I get it. People, they want to roll because it's a workout, right? But then you think about it, and I'm sure you see a lot of black belts out there, and, they're not in great shape, but they're on the mat for the hour, and they're just rolling people up. We're like, how is this person doing that? Because they're very efficient, right? So I really think that's the goal. Like, again, if you think of what's good jiu-jitsu, is efficient jiu-jitsu, is energy efficient jiu-jitsu. So for me, I like to separate skill building and physical capacity, because I'm only using as much energy as I need, again, to accomplish my task. So if I'm not rolling with another black belt, I might not be rolling that hard. So there's times that I'll be rolling the whole class, and I leave the class and I'm not sweating just because I didn't really need to get a workout. So if that was my workout, I'd be like, man, and I've heard other people, what they try to do is they'll try to just use a lot of energy. But in my opinion, if I'm using more energy than I need, that's just promoting bad jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely.
So I don't like, why would I do that? So, and not everybody needs to add conditioning outside of the gym, but if let's say like you have poor cardio, you're a competitor, I would add conditioning outside, because again, training should be for about skill building, and then physical capacity training is something I could do outside, because when you combine them, and there are people that can combine them, they can do well, but there are a lot of people that cannot. So
and it's probably more the latter, right?
Correct, yeah. And there are certain styles, like you look at Cade Rotolo, he's a movement-based style, so he's moving a lot, but he has such a good physical capacity that he can do that. You know, and I was talking to competitor William Tackett, and it was interesting with him is you would assume that most high level competitors redline. He was telling me that he does like very little high level energy skill training. He does very low effort training. So if you think about that, if he's doing very low level training, low effort, I should say low effort, which really surprised me because again, you watch him and you watch his brother and they're both these very active people. But so someone like William Tackett, he has to do a lot of high intensity cardio training outside because he's not getting that in jiu-jitsu.
Can I just ask, like we're talking about cardio versus skill and things on the mat. A few years ago, one of our closest mates is a strength and conditioning coach in Australia here, and that meant nothing to me. He was a yogi originally, and you know, honestly, it meant nothing to me. Go to the gym, lift weights, run on a treadmill, and you're all good, right? Package deal. Not true. So I started working out with JMac in the realms of this strength and conditioning and stretching and you know, so on. It took about probably 6 to 10 months for me really to start understanding that there is such a significant difference. And I know you understand that. I know that you've done a lot of work around the strength and conditioning components as well. Tell me, what does a week look like for you? Because you've just said that a lot of your jiu-jitsu is around technique and understanding and progressing and educating in that. So off the mats, what are you doing? What does your week look like?
So I would average 4 to 5 days on the mat. Right now, I just competed like a few weeks ago, so it's probably closer to 4 for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But generally, I'd be training about 5 days a week. I do conditioning 1 or 2 times a week. Obviously, it depends on my goal. So right now, I just did competition, so I'm kind of like letting my body recover. Yeah. So I'm probably doing 1 long distance, low intensity cardio session a week. When I was competing, I was adding 1 or 2 more a week. I probably do 1 to 2 strength sessions a week, depending on what I want to do. And then being a physical therapist, I do a lot of like joints training. So a lot of people would consider these rehab exercises, but I take what would define what would be different about my rehab exercises versus somebody else is a lot of times we'll take rehab exercises, which are going to be like low intensity or low volume. When I do something, I'm either doing high intensity or high volume to something because there's an intention, right? I'm trying to do something. But I would probably add those rehab exercises, 3 to 4 times a week.
And can you just break down for us, because some people might not know the difference between conditioning versus rehab versus strength. How would you define them for someone? Rehab and strength are really the same thing. It's just the intensity level, right? So, or it's the presence of injured tissue. So if somebody hurt their knee, there's something damage in the knee, which is going to limit how much you can express the strength. But really, once we start to rehab, and one of the ways that I would define rehab is the use of something called mechanotherapy, which is the use of appropriate loading into a damaged tissue to heal it. A lot of people think that just resting is healing. It's not, because what happens is your body will send hormones and chemicals, and it will kind of like stitch the damaged tissue together, whether it's muscle, ligament, connective tissue, whatever. But that tissue is always fundamentally weaker. It's like if you cut yourself, you have a scab, and you can see how like that skin is still very fragile. That's scar tissue. So how do you make that scar tissue become where it was pre-injury? Is you have to appropriately load it. So that's what would be like a rehab type thing. So something you can commonly see when people go into the gym for strength, they're doing a lot of overhead press. But then they go into rehab and they're doing a lot of like rotational exercises because it's good for your rotator cuff. But then once they don't have an injury, they stop doing those rotational efforts. Well, I mean, for me, as a physical therapist, and a performance coach, I can take that rehab exercise, that rotational exercise, but I can ensure that there's enough intensity or volume. So right now I don't have a shoulder injury, but I can still use that movement to create a physiological adaptation. Because if you think about it, with jiu-jitsu, what is the injury profile for the shoulder? It's shoulder rotation. Mm-hmm. So if you're not training shoulder rotation,
how prepared is your shoulder going to be for that injury if you're only overhead pressing? Because it's not the same thing.
And do you increase the load on that as you're training? Is that the idea of it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's just
You know,
like
I'm-
weight training in any other realm. You're increasing load over time, and you're doing the same with these movements.
Correct. Yep. And obviously, you know, I'm a physical therapist, so like I know you might load it more slowly than you would something else, because the shoulder, especially in that case, is going to be a lot weaker than like a two-handed overhead exercise.
And how does mobility training come into this as well? So that's sort of something that I've been wanting to dip into a little bit more about, that flexibility and mobility, and starting to get bigger range of motion and stuff like that. How does that, you know, how do you work that, for example? Or is that even important?
Yeah, well, it depends. But when I say joints training, I include like mobility, joint health, those rehab exercises. Like when I define joint training, that's what I'm referring to. Mm-hmm. So when someone is a jiu-jitsu athlete or someone, how much mobility does that person need? Well, really, it depends on the activity, right? So in jiu-jitsu, we need more hip mobility than like a desk worker, right? So I want to make sure that that athlete has as much range of motion as they need for their sport, plus a buffer. One of the important things that's often done is when people look at mobility, they only do something like stretching. But what stretching does is working on your passive flexibility, which you do need sufficient passive flexibility, but that's kind of like step number one. Step number two is I want to make sure that I can control that entire range. So there's a lot of people, it's actually very common for yoga athletes. They come to me and they're very, very flexible, but they don't have good control of the body because they're always stretching, but they can't use those outer ranges. So for me, as you add that passive length, you have to then have that active control. Yeah. And then the progression to that is once you've the necessary passive length and the active control, then you can load that in full range of motion. So really my joint training and strength training and rehab and mobility are really the same thing. It just depends on my goal.
Right.
It's an amazing transition to looking at that, thinking about all the exercises that I've gone through with JMac over the last sort of 2 years. And I had to go away for a couple of months because I had neck surgery, and then I got to come back and start the training again. And what spun me out was how quickly my body adapted back into it based on memory recall of the muscles and everything. Sure. Break that down a little bit for us. Like if somebody does embark, and you have a full program of this for people, so we're going to get to that in a second. But sure. If somebody embarks on this journey and starts to realize the importance of the conditioning of muscles, what happens when they have to take a bit of time off, and why does it seem to come back so quickly?
I mean, so people don't realize that deconditioning. So obviously when you stress your body adapts positively, you get stronger. When you are not stressing yourself, your body's going to adapt negatively. But that deconditioning can take a long time. Like, so for one, people don't lose strength as quickly as they think. But then two, strength is both a physiological or a biological function, and it's a neurological function. What I mean is, if I want to do something very high effort, when I'm really pushing the intensity, my brain is going to the muscle and I'm trying to recruit more motor units to do so. So a lot of time when we say max strength, what that's primarily working is the nervous system. And then if you look at something like bodybuilding, where they're really focusing on hypertrophy, building muscle, that's going to be more focused on the biology, which is again building muscle. And even though you are not probably weren't working out as much as you were during your rehab phase, you're still like moving around. So it's not like you're doing nothing. Like if you were like sat in a bed and did nothing, you would atrophy much quicker, but you're still moving around, right? So that deconditioning phase, like I said, is a lot slower than people realize.
What part of your training, like in regards to jiu-jitsu, how impactful is this kind of training to jiu-jitsu overall? Because I know that there are a lot of people out there that do jiu-jitsu and probably only do jiu-jitsu. There are some people out there that will do jiu-jitsu, weights and cardio, but I'm not sure that there's a lot of people out there that are looking at the conditioning side of this in their journey through this art form. What percentage do you think it rates as an important part for the body?
It depends on the person. So one of the things I would say is based on the individual. So when we say conditioning, we say aerobic conditioning. Obviously there's some people, if they're not a competitor, it might be more beneficial for them to work the mobility, joint health, or strength. If you're a competitor, having that conditioning is going to be a lot more important. But then there's people that have very poor conditioning, and because they're always tired, they're always sitting out, that is going to negatively affect their time on the mat, because they have to, every other round they're sitting out because they're exhausted. So then if you think over a period, how much live training did they miss because they're always sitting out? You know what I mean? Yeah. So that athlete might require more conditioning. So it's harder to give like a broad number. It's really based on the individual. But when I work with people, obviously we figure that out. Like what does that person need the most? Again, from a joint health perspective, from a strength perspective, from a conditioning strength, because conditioning is used for recovery, not just within the session, but it's also between sessions. So a lot of times when they're new, unless they're 20 and, they're different. But like, let's say you're in your 30s. A lot of people, when they start in their 30s, can only handle like 2 jiu-jitsu sessions a week because their body's too sore and they're too burnt out. If they had a better aerobic base, they would be able to recover quicker, and they might be able to add a little bit more training.
I find that it's quite hilarious. And back to what we were talking about before, I'm a 46-year-old lady. I'm a black belt, but I'll get these big, strong white belt dudes come in and go 100% with me. And by the end of the round, they're like laying on the mat exhausted and just have to sit out the next round. And I sit up and go, thanks for the round. And I haven't even got that puff up. But that, again, is back to that efficiency. But it's interesting to see these, young, fit, healthy guys who...
And girls. There's a lot of...
And girls, of course, who, just sort of put it all in for that session or that round or whatever, and then do miss out on their training because, number one, they're not relaxing enough yet, or number two, maybe they need to do a little bit of work on their cardio and fitness and health and all of that stuff.
I think we pretty much... I would argue that we come to this almost every episode at the moment, and especially with the kind of guests, the caliber of guests that we've got coming through, is that learn technique.
Yes. Technique
matters. The win doesn't matter in the gym. And I think for the young people starting out, for anybody really starting out, I started jiu-jitsu at 46 or something. Obviously I'm old, and that even at that point, ego was a thing. I didn't want to tap. I didn't want to be tapped. It was still a prevalent thing as a white belt and even as a blue belt. And, the running comment was, oh, wow, Matt, your wife's strong. Yeah, okay, fine. I'm shit at jiu-jitsu, but I'm really strong, I get it. Don't use strength. If I can get through a roll and I don't feel like I've used strength, that's awesome for me now. That's a huge win for me, irrelevant of the outcome.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I want to say is I think that comes to the leadership of the instructor. Like, at the end of class, I talk about it. I tell my students that, like, I have I'll be like, this person tapped me. They're not a black belt. It's okay. Like, I'm upfront about that, because the more that I say, oh, this person tapped me, then hopefully they're like, well, he didn't care. Why do I care? Like, if you're a blue belt and somebody taps you, and I'm like, I got tapped by a purple belt, like, what does it matter? So I think it comes down to the gym and just pushing that for that nice, healthy environment. I'll have to ask my students if that helps, but I would like to think it does.
Oh, look, I'm a student at a gym that has exactly that ethos, and I'll tell you right now, it helps. And we've been in other gyms, so to come to a place where the leadership stand up the front and take the ego out of the equation is a huge thing, and to see it so openly is massive. So I reckon your students will all give you positive feedback in that regard. Yeah. Can we jump for a second just into your program? So I know you've mentioned that you're coaching over in America, and you obviously have your own physical therapy business over there, but you actually have an international business, don't you?
Sure. Well, a virtual business that I can work with anyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Break that down for
Sure.
us.
So generally, so there's kind of like two ways that I look at this. So it either can be return to jiu-jitsu coaching, or it could be like this joint training, strength and conditioning, right? So there are some people that come to me, they don't have an injury, or maybe it's like something very mild, right? They're like, well, my knee is not as good as I would like. So, I'll work with them virtually. And I would incorporate this type of joints training. But again, it's not just like these rehab exercises, because it's rehab to strength and conditioning, right? And it could be whatever that athlete needs. Maybe they need better joint health. Maybe they need better strength. Maybe they need better conditioning. And again, we just build that in based on whatever they need. It could be all three, because I've worked with people. Obviously, we go from, let's bulletproof their knees. Then we move to like, let's get to a strength program, and now they're getting ready for a competition, and we transition to conditioning. So it's really whatever that athlete needs. A lot of times too, especially if they're not black belts, actually sometimes even if there are, me being a black belt, then I can kind of be that performance coach of changing their mindset. So all these things that we say, I can say that to my students, but then, this person that's in Germany, they're at a gym where everybody rolls like it's like ADCC finals, right? So they're always killing each other, and I have to kind of change their mindset, right? So, but me being a black belt, I still compete, I think means that they'll listen to me a little bit better than they would maybe just some random physio or strength coach. So that's kind of like my program number one. And then program number two is a return to jiu-jitsu coaching. So often a lot of people will go to physio for an acute injury, and then they're done, but there's a gap between when they're discharged and when they're ready for jiu-jitsu. And it's a pretty big gap. Now, I don't know what that's like in Australia, but in the US, it's quite big. So, because for the most part in the US, it's often people using their insurance. So all insurance really cares about is if they can just like do day-to-day things. They don't really care about getting back to jiu-jitsu. So people are done, and I kind of fill that gap. So they get discharged from normal physical therapy, and then I take over to make sure that they do all the steps for jiu-jitsu, because usually people say, okay, we're going to discharge you, go back to jiu-jitsu, go back light, which means nothing, because that doesn't mean anything, right? So when I'm with someone, I, one, can ensure that their joint does what it's supposed to for jiu-jitsu. Two, what I can do is I can have them do various orthopedic return to sport tests, so I'm confident that that limb is where it was likely pre-injury. Three, I give them a graded exposure of jiu-jitsu. So what can they do or what can't they do? Because I can give people guidance. We'll say neck for a perfect example. So if I'm working with someone who has a neck injury, I can give them advice on what would be a preferred style of jiu-jitsu. Generally, I recommend gi over no gi initially, and the reason why is because in the gi chokes are going to be nicer on the neck versus no gi. You're going to see a lot more guillotines, darces, anacondas, which have a bit of a neck crank. It depends, right? And you can still do those in the gi, but they're harder in the gi. So a lot of times people are like, well, I can do this choke or I can do a gi choke. Well, they're going to go for the gi choke, right?
Yeah.
So that would be one thing. Two, obviously, what are some things if you had a neck injury that I would avoid? I usually stay one from a style, stay away from an inverting style. Obviously, that makes sense. Don't invert. Two, I actually don't really like close guard when I'm getting someone back initially. And the reason why is because one of the common passes is going to be a stack pass. So if you're playing close guard, you go for a triangle, now you get stacked, that's bad. So when I'm working, so I can give them these general advice, but then I can kind of give them other advice, like what are some other things that they can do? Because most people say you have to stop jiu-jitsu, but it's like, well, how about I just give them better advice, what they can do and what they can't do?
Because you know that practitioners are like, oh, if I'm told I can't do jiu-jitsu, I'm just going to sneak off and do it anyway.
Exactly. They're like, hello. I kind of half joke that jiu-jitsu athletes are like drug addicts. Like they're going to go back to where they should have done.
We don't joke about that, Mike. That's a very serious thing. Factually accurate.
And this is, I guess, what makes you so special in this area, because so many medical practitioners out there don't know what jiu-jitsu is.
Sure.
In its its real form. And so, you know, you go into a doctor's office and you say, I've got this injury. How did you do it? Oh, I did it at jiu-jitsu. But when can I go back? And they look up jiu-jitsu on the internet and they're seeing like the world finals of the ADCC or, you know, whatever it is.
Never.
I worded that very poorly. But, you know, and they're going, oh, you're not doing that. Like you can't go back and do that at all. So not realizing that there's a class portion and that you've got some training partners that will go very, you know, do flow rolls with you or just do ping pong or play or, you know, that you could just, like we often say to our students if they're injured, you know, you can come in work as a group of 3 so that anything that you can do, you can jump in on, or if you can't have a submission or a move applied to you, then you're the one watching, but you might be able to do that to someone else. So you might not be able to be choked, but you can choke them. And that way you're still getting a little bit of training in. And as we talk about all the time, like for most jiu-jitsu practitioners, it's not even always the activity itself. It's the community, it's the getting out of the house, it's the mental health and all of those other benefits. So
How much of an impact do you see mental health play in jiu-jitsu?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I was looking up, I think the article was martial arts, not jiu-jitsu specific, but the article said within like 7 days, like a martial art practitioner is going to have like severe psychological negative impact because they can't train, right? And that's why they go back before they're ready and all that stuff. So again, for me, there is a psychological component of not being able to train, which they rush. So again, how would I address that? Is there are going to be some injuries where I don't want people on the mat, and I can explain that to them, right? Because there's some things you just don't stay on the mat. But there are some injuries where you can get on the mat. But again, that's why I give them the guidance what they can do. Yeah. I also feel by giving them a great exposure to activity that helps address the psychological re-injury fear. Because let's say you have a bad injury and you get hurt. Well, it's like, well, I don't want to do this again because I'm going to get hurt. But when you slowly ramp it up and I give you specific parameters and somebody's guiding you, because, and you know, everyone's, and I'm guilty of this too, like they're just, you know, I'm like, oh, I'm okay. I can go back when I really shouldn't. You know what I mean? So someone giving you guidance that makes it so they're like, okay, well, this is what I cannot do, or this is what I can do. It kind of helps them slowly build up. So by the time they are going back to full rolling, there's been this process where they're comfortable. They're starting to work. You know, we talked about conditioning, but again, you are going to get a cardio from roll. So you're going to feel like you're not necessarily in bad shape because you've been moving around for a few weeks. So you're much more confident by the time you actually go back live.
It's a real thing, that psychological impact. And I have a friend who blew her knee out training with someone. And she was talking to me the other day saying it's been about a year since that happened. And the process coming back has been about learning to trust her body again, learning to trust her training, partners again, learning to trust jiu-jitsu again. Like I'm sure these make a huge impact psychologically on you. What are the injuries, just quickly, that you would say, no, stay away from jiu-jitsu? What are those that you were talking about just then?
So I would say the more severe ones, we'll talk about neck, and it's neck and spine. So we'll see if this is you. When someone having some type of pinched nerve or herniated disc, but we can go a little bit more detail, right? Oh, I know. She said she had a neck surgery. So.
I had 2 discs.
Absolutely her.
I had C3 and C4 disc replaced and 4 through to 6 fused.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's a word.
So when we look at a herniated disc, right, I want to define where you absolutely should stay off. So generally, if I can reproduce ridiculous symptoms, like you can move your neck, you feel symptoms shooting down your arm, I don't want anyone doing live training. I mean, that's just the case of it. If someone has like a really severe ligament injury, so they just had ACL reconstruction, or I know in Australia they do a lot of non-operative care, so someone just has a full thickness ACL tear, early on, I'm going to say stay off the mats. Now, there are some people that would be considered a coper. And actually, a lot of this research is done in Australia just based on socialized medicine. But there are people that would be considered a coper, meaning they have no ACL and they can do jiu-jitsu fine and you don't even know that. But like those would be like two things: stay off the mat. If somebody has like a bucket handle meniscus tear, so their knees like locking and catching, like that's a surgery thing. Go get surgery. When somebody has a joint dislocation, so their shoulder pops out of place, that's one of those things you really don't want to rush coming back, because once the joint dislocates, it's more prone to happening again. And every time it comes out, there's always a chance that there's other damage. It could be tearing your labrum. It could be causing arthritis. It could be causing rotator cuff pathology. So, and also, the more that happens, the easier it gets. So if you're someone that has a repetitive joint dislocation, there's a point where I say like, well, rehab's not going to work. It's too loose. You know, a really good example would be TJ Dillashaw. So in his last fight, he was saying that within the one camp, he had 20 shoulder dislocations. Well, that's like a 3-month period. You know, so obviously his shoulder was extremely unstable. I think he realized it probably was going to be his last fight, so that's why he took it anyway. He fights, it dislocates, he loses, and he's had this horrible history of pretty much at this point, he needs to have a total shoulder replacement. But he tried these like experimental surgeries that all failed. So if you ever listen to him, it's kind of sad because like he himself will say that he's in like the best condition of his life. He's the most skilled, but his shoulder just cannot do what it needs to for mixed martial arts, which, you know, I don't want to say if he got that addressed early, maybe he would still be fighting.
That's actually one of the things that Dr. Phil said on the episode with us, is that if people were to go and deal with their issues when they first presented, instead of waiting so long, they would be able to rehab it and get over it and get back in on the mats quicker. So what would your general advice be for people when they first injure themselves?
I mean, that's exactly it, is get the injury addressed early. Because what happens, and you've been doing jiu-jitsu a long time, you're a black belt, what you'll see is, I mean, there's a lot of injuries that do come back. Like you have, you know, someone pops their knee and they never get it checked and, oh, it's better. But maybe they're not back to 100%. Maybe they're at like 99%. You do jiu-jitsu for 10 years, you have all these like little nagging chronic injuries, and now you're at like 70%. So it's very common if you watch a lot of masters jiu-jitsu athletes, what's the classic old guy game? It's the bottom half guard smash pass. And I joke it's because they can't do anything else. Like they can't really play guard because the back won't let them. They have to go slow. So
you're talking my language.
I'm like, if you can address things early before it becomes bad, we can get you back to that 100% versus, again, just developing these little disabilities along the way.
And it's about keeping that baseline high, isn't it? Because in 20 years' time, if your baseline at 40 is already 70%, then at 60, you're going to be
30%.
You know, declining. Yeah. So bringing those baselines back up to good, or as good as we possibly can. I say all the time, I want to be a grandma on the mats that's my goal, right? So my kids are 17 and 19. We're a long way off being grandma, but we hope.
I'll remind her of that in a few years.
But that's my goal. I want to be doing this, you know, until I'm 80, 85. I want to be Leo Gracie at 92, still, you know, doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and I bring that up a lot. Like, obviously, Helio Gracie was modifying his jiu-jitsu. He's not rolling with like ADCC champions, but he was doing some form of jiu-jitsu until his late 80s or early 90s. And I really think should be the goal of everybody.
Absolutely.
You know, I have a student now, he's 58. He still competes. Like, he still gets after it. And it's funny because he does not have the typical old guy game. He's the most flexible guy in the gym. His thing for a long time was buggy choking. So you see this old guy and you're like, oh, this old guy, I'm just going to crush him. And then he buggy chokes people. They're like, you're not supposed to be doing this.
I like those ones.
So what does he do? What's his secret sauce? Do you have a lot to do with him and his mobility?
So he had done mobility before he worked with me. However, I did work with him from an injury standpoint, because he did get injured because he was too flexible. So we did some rehab, and then we transitioned and we worked conditioning for quite a bit. Because again, like he was like, well, I don't feel like my conditioning's good. I was like, well, his game was letting them pass the side control, and he would try to submit them from there. I'm like, fundamentally, you're working like really behind.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I mean, gravity works for a reason. Like, you know, there's a reason you want to get on top. So
get on top and stay on top.
I know a few
Exactly.
people that like to dig themselves into holes and then
Yeah.
try and put, you know, shitty
Yeah,
positions
sure.
on from there. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
know
different,
what
right? Like as a black belt, like I'll do that too. I'll put myself in a terrible position and try to work my way out. But you know, I don't do that with other black belts.
Of course, and we have this conversation
A
too.
lot. Like, how much have you seen jiu-jitsu change over the last sort of 15 years? Or has it even changed in the last 15 years in relation to the message of putting your body first?
Yeah, that's a good thing. A good question. I don't know if it's really changed. I mean, I might be like, you know, I might be one of the voices that's trying to change it. Because, you know, like 15 years ago, it was still a very fringe sport. Not a lot of people knew about it. Not a lot of people do it. I would say one of the things that's very cool about jiu-jitsu versus other sports, not even other martial arts, but sports in general, is you can still be a competitor as a master's athlete. You know, I was listening to a podcast, and this guy that was doing judo, he was saying that over 25 was considered an old guy. I'm like, oh man, this is horrible. You know,
Ouch.
but like I said, I have a student who's 58 and he still competes, right? So, and I feel that is what makes jiu-jitsu different, because you can be like a Cade Rotolo and you're like a, you know, like a Tasmanian devil, but you also can be that guy who's very slow, very control-based game. You can play that game for a long time. So I think now that more people are doing it, and you're seeing people in their 40s and their 50s or even 60s, like you look at Master Worlds, they're 60s or 70-year-olds competing. I think people are getting more aware of it. I also think that overall health is being pushed, not even in the jiu-jitsu community, but just in general. Like, you know, I would hear stories of like, you know, when I was a kid, like a 40-year-old or 50-year-old dad was like considered old. And again, I'm 40 now, and I don't feel, I definitely feel different than when I was in my 20s, but I'm not that much more. Like I always joked, I'm like, I don't know if my dad can like sit on the ground. Like when I was a kid, I just never, you know, my dad, very, very healthy, very good shape, but he's like a tin man. Like he just didn't look mobile.
Yeah.
So I think over the last 20 years, health has been changing, which works along with jiu-jitsu.
It's funny, you know, we have to have insurance for our car and our house, and there's always that really important emphasis put on that. But I think only in the last few years, you're right, we're starting to see that message about our own health and our own bodies as well. And it's the only one we've got, right? So, you know, until they replace everything mechanically, it put us first. I just want to go back for a second. We started talking about your programs. And, you know, from a remote international perspective, you do have a couple of different streams in regards to your educational structure that you've set up. Can we just break those down for a bit? I know that one of them is for any professionals out there in the physiotherapy, medical type world, that you do have programs that they can purchase that help them understand the world between, is it just jiu-jitsu and physiotherapy? Is that what it's aligned to?
Yeah. So I have 4 different things. So it's the personalized program, which is I touched on, which is I work with people directly one-on-one. I work with like rehab professionals, so physical therapists, physios, chiropractors, anyone that kind of works rehab. I work with business owners, and then I have programs for athletes. So the physio program, I have 2 online courses. So the first one is called Treating the Jiu-Jitsu Athlete. And this is kind of an introduction to what Jiu-Jitsu is. So for most, now that Jiu-Jitsu is growing, as I touched on, there's a lot of physios out there that are like white belts. So like they do it, they they kind of want to work with combat athletes, but they don't really understand it. So I kind of like start to bridge the gap. Now, how is jiu-jitsu different from football, et cetera, right? So I go over, how is it different? What does it look like? What are some of the injury mechanisms? What are some of the unique injuries you're going to see? How would I define the rehab process for a jiu-jitsu athlete? And then how do I get them to sport? And then I released a new course actually this week called Jiu-Jitsu Rehab Masterclass. So this is for that intermediate or advanced jiu-jitsu practitioner. So I touched on, like, for your neck, right? I kind of, it's a long course where I look at neck injuries. So we look at the different neck injuries when someone has a herniated disc, a disc replacement or disc fusion, how I kind of get them back. And then we can talk about some of those very specific activity modifications, because I was a black belt back in 2018, but until I sat down and I kind of like wrote it out, like, what do I think is really a risky position? I would give people, stay away from inverting. But through this course, I went to a lot more detail on how I want to get them back. So it's for that advanced rehab professional that, again, they work with a lot of jiu-jitsu people, but they need to have a little bit more of an understanding, because I might say, you have an LCL injury in your knee, you need to avoid K-guard. Well, if you're a white belt, you don't even know what K-guard is. So, but like, again, I go body part by body part. So it's technique based. And then I go neck, shoulder, elbow, hip, knee, ankle. I didn't include wrist, but that might be something I'll add in the future.
Well, dirty wrist lockers, they should just go away.
Kick them to the curb.
Kick them out. Kick them out. They don't belong in the
Go
jiu-jitsu.
find a new martial art. Okay, and so anybody who's interested, and just to break it down, there are programs for people who are physiotherapists that want to work with a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners. And there is courses for individuals. There are courses for business owners like Rach that own gyms that give them insight as to, how to look after their members, I'm guessing, better, and how to be aware of the physical attributes that can affect individuals on the mats. How, for people who want to investigate this, for people who want to undertake the courses, how do they find these courses? How do they find you?
The best way would be Instagram. So look in my bio, Dr. Kickass. I have it there. But I have a website that has it broken down. So there's, again, the 2 physical therapy courses, Jiu-Jitsu Athlete, Jiu-Jitsu Rehab Masterclass. The one for business owners is called the Mat Sanctuary. And then for the athletes that want like a self, if they want an exercise program on joint health, it's called Jiu-Jitsu, Kinstretch for Jiu-Jitsu. And I have 3 different models, spine, lower body, and upper body. And those are, follow along programs that they can do without me, giving them personalized guidance.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And then if they want to reach you, they can reach you via, Instagram for personalized guidance. They can actually engage with you as your client.
Correct.
And they do that through Instagram. So in our blurb for the episode, when it's released, guys, we're going to put all of those links attached to that as well, the website and your Instagram link as well. And obviously zones, regional zones and things like that aren't an issue. You're sitting in America today. We're here in the Central Coast, New South Wales, and we're kicking it on for an hour or so. So you've got the flexibility to meet the time zones for people in Australia as well.
Yeah, so I work with people all over the world for this: Thailand, Australia, Germany, you name it. I work with a lot of people. Australia is actually a little bit better for me. Europe's a little bit trickier because, it's so far. By the time they're up, I'm asleep. Yeah. So Australia, because it's almost, I think it's 18 to 19 hour difference, is actually a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah, your afternoons and our mornings work really well.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of I want to shoot fire. Did you have any more questions?
I just actually wanted to ask, because I didn't realize that you had that business owners one. And we have a lot of coaches and business owners that listen to our podcast. Can you just dive into that a little bit more? Can you explain that for us?
Sure. So it's called the Mat Sanctuary, and the reason why is because I made the course treating the jiu-jitsu athlete, but obviously that's a 10-hour course for rehab professionals. But one of the things I go into is the injury mechanisms. How do people get hurt? What are some of the things, like, because there's a lot of injuries that people don't know they're going to get hurt from. You could take something like the lockdown. You might learn that a lot of people get injured from the lockdown. And I would argue that a lot of injuries happen from ignorance.
Yes.
I would say the same about leg locks. I am a dirty leg locker. I'm well admit.
No, that's just one level up from a dirty wrist locker. No, it's all good.
Hey, I have no problem heel hooking white belts or children.
Yes, Matthew. Producer Matt's sitting over there cacking himself right now. I keep telling you two are twins. Sorry, keep going.
But it comes to, in my opinion, ego and awareness, ignorance, right? A lot of people, you roll with a white belt, they don't know that they're in a heel hook, and they start rolling. And if I just holding the position, they're going to blow their own leg, right?
Yes.
So for me, it's the awareness of, as the attacker. There's also the defender. They have to realize they're in danger, right? And then two, a lot of times I feel like a lot of injuries are going to happen through ego via, you're a blue belt and you're rolling with a brown belt. You want to tap that brown belt. So you go a little bit too hard, or it's that brown belt who's a gi specialist. They don't really do leg locks. There's that blue belt who's a heel hook wizard, and they don't want to tap to a blue belt, so they let it go a little too far. So, so this course, I kind of dive into that. Where can you see the injuries? What's something happen? I kind of touch on some warm-up recommendations I have, like, again, how I run my class. So I make it more affordable than the physical therapy course.
Wow. Okay, that's really cool.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
And again, same way to get in touch. We'll put the links up on the chat as well, and Instagrams probably. Oh, I did want to say too, for all those listening, it is doctor spelt as the word DOCTOR, not DR. So
it's Doctor _ Kickass.
Yeah. So, because a lot of the time I was just writing DR, and that is, you are not what comes up for that.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
That's a completely different thing. And here in Australia, we're really big on shortening everything. We're a very lazy country, so we shorten everything. So when we say doctor, we just go straight to DR.
I see. Gotcha.
So on Instagram, it's the full word.
The only other question I had, and it's such a big industry, is things like supplements and extra help in that region. Is there anything you'd recommend to go along with, mobility, longevity, all these things as, practitioners enter their 40s and 50s and want to keep doing this for the long term? Is there anything that you've got?
Do you take anything?
Well,
so I would say,
no, I mean like supplements.
How about would you recommend anything?
It's all down to the words. That's right.
So when it comes to exercise recovery, in my opinion, the three most important things are load management. Man, you can't do more work than you have to do the amount of work that you can recover from. So you can't just be like, let me train like a UFC athlete if I'm a white belt. Like, you have to work your way up. Two, you need to sleep. I personally prioritize sleep. Granted, I don't have children, but I try to get 8 hours of sleep a night. And then nutrition. And I would start with nutrition, good hydration, good food, good whole foods. Something like supplements, I feel, is like that last 5%. So if you have bad load management, bad sleep, bad nutrition, that should be the first thing you focus on. Okay. Yep. From a supplement perspective, it's not my scope of practice from like a dietary nutrition, but what I take creatine because it's probably the most well-researched supplement in the world. A lot of good benefits, both physical and cognitive benefits of creatine. I take fish oil. I think I take, there's something I take for energy. It might be like ashwagandha root. That's probably the only weird thing I take. And then I take like magnesium 3 and 8 for sleep. So that's really all I do. I take an electrolyte supplement post-training. Like I said, I'm 40 years old, so I'm almost a master 3 athlete. No TRT, no peptides. I just, again, take care of my body. I don't drink alcohol. That's been huge for recovery too.
Yep.
Makes a big difference.
Actually, we Grant and I got Whoop straps. I don't know if you know what The whoop,
Yeah, I do.
And it.
What's a whip strap?
Well,
You have
it's
to
a
break that
whoop,
down.
like WHOOP. You wear it constantly on your wrist or on your arm when you train and things like that, and it measures your recovery and your sleep patterns. It's actually got deep dives into so many different areas. It's fantastic. But one of the things we would notice, or I would notice, if I had 2 drinks of alcohol, my recovery would be in the red the next day, which is very poor. Or if you had a big night, you would be in red recovery zone for 2 or 3 days afterwards. It would instantly affect your recovery and your sleep. So, yeah, alcohol's a huge one.
We're in the clear.
Yeah.
Neither Matt nor I drink, so it's all good.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, couple of quick questions for you. Gi or no gi? What's your favourite?
No gi for sure. But I will say, so I trained gi because or no gi because when I started, I was thinking I wanted to do MMA, so it made more sense. But I trained gi the whole time. I would say I was like 80% no gi, 20% gi. But most recently, so the gym I'm training at, the owner, he's also a high-level judo athlete. So that really motivated me to get into the gi because I really like judo. So it's kind of shifting a little bit. But the problem is all the classes they end up teaching are no gi. So I don't get to do as much gi as I would want. But I would say right now I do 80% no gi, 20% gi. I probably would add another gi class if my body would let me recover.
Have you studied judo?
I mean, like I said, the owner, he's a 14th degree judo black belt. So I'm learning from someone who's very good at judo.
Right. Okay. And so is this a pathway that you're going to take all the way through as well?
I would definitely love to get my judo black belt. I think that would be really cool. I definitely think that there's, because really, if you think about it, jiu-jitsu and judo essentially are the same art. They just kind of took different branches.
Yep.
And I think, both arts would benefit by cross training.
We often say they're 2 sides of the same coin. So judo's more up, like the stand-up stuff and the throws and the takedowns. And then the pin. Jiu-jitsu's less of that, but more of the stuff that's on the ground. It's kind of, if you put those 2 together, you've got a very holistic martial art. It's beautiful.
I agree. And I think that's what it should be, honestly. And I get why people don't like judo. Judo's hard. But, I definitely have a lot of respect for judo, for sure.
Yeah.
Favorite position in gi and favorite position in no gi?
Favorite. So just position in general.
Yeah. What's your go-to?
Honestly, it's hard to say. I'd probably say mount. I like mount the best, but it's a close toss-up between mount and back control. And I think the reason why I like mount better is because mount, again, one of the pathways to make it effective, it's a very easy funnel to back control, but I don't think back control is an easy funnel to mount unless, they're escaping. So I would probably go with mount.
Okay. Competing or pleasure?
I mean, I do both. I would say, so I just competed. I did an ADCC Open about 3 weeks ago, and I was thinking, man, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So, so I would say it was just a lot of, I competed in mixed martial arts, and you think, oh, well, you take a small local grappling, tournament, the stress should be less. It's the same amount of stress.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, I still define myself more as a recreational hobbyist, but I like that I have the opportunity to compete. Again, as a 40-year-old, I use competition more as a monitor to assess skill growth. Again, I go compete. It gives me feedback on what I need to focus on. So I probably will compete again, but it's not my focus. I feel like I'm probably at the tail end of my competition career.
Never say never.
Yeah.
It's one of the most beautiful things of our martial art that we have access to, the best of the best in the world so easily, and we talk about this too, where if you play basketball for your local club and you're in competition, you don't get to ever go to anywhere else and compete against Michael Jordan, or, any of these greats. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, and we were talking about this earlier, Masters division, Grant was saying, if he went over to Las Vegas and went to the Worlds, in his division is like Janji Ribeiro and Bashesha and these guys, right?
Well, Matt's been over twice. We've been to Vegas twice for World Masters, and I was asking him if he wanted to go this year, and he's like, no friggin' way, because he's a black belt now, and everybody in that Masters group for him, and is all the people that he's been admiring all these years, like, no.
It's honestly one of the coolest things, I think.
Yeah, I think Masters Worlds is the biggest competition of the world. I think this year there was like 10,000 competitors.
It is probably the best rock concert I've ever been to in my life twice now.
Yeah.
Like, it's just for the atmosphere, the people, that watching the mats, the dynamics of it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Very exciting. Okay, so are you going into a class and you can only do one? You can either drill or you can roll. What do you want to do?
Oh, roll. Not even close.
Isn't that why we do it? That's the fun part of it, right?
Just checking. Do you teach kids?
I don't. Kids scare me.
They scare all of us, really.
That's understandable. I have them and they scare me.
Yeah. I remember when I was, before I went to PT school, I was trying to do martial arts for a living. I was teaching, so I had to cover a kids class. I did that for like 2 months, and it was so much stress. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore.
More stressful than the competition.
Oh, for sure.
Can I just ask, so just on kids, we have 3 daughters that we have explained to them that jiu-jitsu is the one thing in their life that is mandatory until they're 18. For a gamut of reasons. Rach has 2 boys, and they obviously they're a jiu-jitsu family, so they're doing it. How important is physiotherapy in, like, what would you say to parents listening about their kids? What should they be aware of in regards to conditioning off the mats to help protect children long term? From the ages of, let's say between 12 and kind of 16, 17, what are some of the things that kids should be doing?
So I would give you a different answer than you'd expect. And I think that, so there's a lot of evidence against early specialization for kids. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because as you're learning, you kind of want to promote learning of multiple different motor skills. Mm-hmm. So I think it's actually better for them to not commit to jiu-jitsu and to do a lot of things. I would say for them, keep it fun. If you too focused on strength and conditioning, it's not going to be as enjoyable. Like, let them go play some football as their cardio, right? You know what I mean? Because not only is that going to develop better motor skills, which will make them better motor learners, which in long term will make them better at learning jiu-jitsu, it decreases overuse injuries, it decreases burnout, and like I said, it keeps it fun. I think for kids, try to keep it as fun as you can, because so often you hear people, they force their kids into jiu-jitsu and competitions, and then the kids hate it and they don't want to do it. So as long as they enjoy it, I think they're going to have better longevity in the sport.
But in regards to the physical side of things, we make it mandatory from a self-defense point of view, and they're allowed to do other things as well. In regard, because I know how taxing jiu-jitsu can be on the body sometimes, and our kids have to do it, but they also want to do it. So are there things that we could be doing to help them outside of jiu-jitsu to help them better protect their joints or their muscles or things like that?
Sure. Obviously any type of joint training or strength and conditioning would be helpful, but I would caution with, you don't want to overload them to where they're like, they don't want to do it. Right. So, even kids can lift weight, but it doesn't, unless they're really competing, it doesn't have to be like the thing they do. Yeah. It obviously for them, it's finding that like happy balance between like them still want to do it, but stay safe.
Yeah. So if they're just doing jiu-jitsu and they're happy doing that and there's no real push and drive on it, then they're okay. Our kids are so well protected, so it's not really.
Honestly, I feel like kids that come up through, and my boys started when they were 4 and they're now 17 and 19. And we had our eldest on the podcast last week, but he was saying that, for him, it's always just been about fun. I've never seen him injured at jiu-jitsu. Or if it has been, it's been like a minor little, someone's put an arm bar on a little bit too hard. Kids bounce back so quick. 2 days later, they're not even thinking about their arm anymore. And because they don't come to it with ego, they come to it through play. And if they're in a really good environment, of course. I mean, there are some academies out there, I think, take it way too seriously for their kids' programs. But, and we see those kids at competition and it's just, anyway, it's next level. But, some of my kids don't even know some of the stuff sometimes I go to these kids' competitions and like these little kids doing like almost K-guard and you're like, how do they even teach that to the kids? My kids pick their nose when they're listening to I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I need to pick those coaches' brains a little bit and go, how are you teaching your kids? But, keep it fun, keep it playful. That's really important. And I find that kids, if they do get a niggle, they just bounce back so quick.
I think you're right. I mean, they're young and they're flexible and they've got that component in it. We have 3 daughters. Willow is very much, she loves gymnastics. She does that. She coaches that and she does that a lot. The other 2, they're just, no, they don't do anything. And they're happy not doing anything else too. So Addie just smiles and makes friends with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, any other questions?
No, I think that's so comprehensive. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Absolutely. But there is something that we always do.
There is, but before we get into that, I do want to ask, if you had a message for everybody listening today, if you could pass on one thing about you, about your program, about anything, what would it be? Now's your chance. What do you want to say to all the listeners out there?
If you have an injury, get it addressed early. Work with someone, preferably a sports physical therapist, a sports physio. I think longevity in the sport is the most important thing. Don't wait until it becomes too big of an issue where it's much harder to address.
Yeah. And reach out to you at any time and get on board.
Sure.
Have a look at the programs. Okay. So Mike, we have an acronym. Part of my family's ethos is called HOPE, and it's help one person every day. And so we bring that into all of the podcasts that we do. And at the end of our podcasts, so Rach and I, every episode, will say what we hope all the listeners will take away from this episode on whatever level it might be. And so we'll get to you last. Rach, what's your hope?
My hope is that everyone realises they've got one body in this life and to look after it. And it's what we do now that's going to impact your life 20 years down the track. So, you might think, I'm young, I'm fit, I'm healthy, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. Oh, I've got that injury. That can be a tomorrow problem. That's a tomorrow Rachael problem, right? When in fact, often... I have students come in that go, I've had this pain here for like a week now that's kept me off the mats, but I'm back tonight. And I'll go, right, and what have you done about it? Or who have you gone to see about it? No one. And I'm like, well, probably not going to just magically heal itself. Maybe go get it addressed. Maybe go, because they'll come off the mats and go, oh, no, it's still hurting, Go see someone, go get it fixed, go get it addressed. The quicker you do it, the quicker you'll be back on the mats. And that's something that I've always tried to do for myself in, if I get a niggle or I get an injury, I go get it addressed pretty quickly. And I find that I don't have these long, after training for 12, 14 years, whatever it's been, I don't have these long-lasting injuries that just continually rear their ugly heads at me. It might be a new little injury or a new little tweak, but most of all, I look after my body so that in 20 years, 40 years, I can still be doing this. So that would be my hope for everyone listening today.
Nice. My hope is that I want people to really own their own journey and don't give up. If you have something that's going on that you feel in your own body isn't quite right, and you get told or you get palmed off by the doctor, no, you'll be right, take a Panadol, go home, rest up, push a little harder or seek an alternative opinion. I went 7 years with a neck injury and didn't push hard enough and probably didn't seek outside of the direct line of GP, right? So my hope is that people start to understand that they have options. They have alternatives. whether it's your chiropractor, whether it's a physiotherapist, whether it's a strength and conditioning person, don't just take your local GP's word as gospel. Seek it out. Understand your body and push harder if you're feeling it's not quite right. That's my hope. Back you. Believe in you. Understand your body. And you have the right to push harder for better answers. That's my hope.
Beautiful. What would
I
you?
guess.
Yeah.
So I guess my hope would be that people realize that injury management is sports performance. And the reason why is because you have to take what's the most common reason people are off the mat. It's going to be injury. If you want to be good at jiu-jitsu, the less mat time you have, the less, it's going to be harder to get good at jiu-jitsu. So as long as people realize that managing injuries, doing things that will prevent them from getting injured in training will equal better jiu-jitsu skill in the long run, they're going to have a better jiu-jitsu journey. It's going to be longer. And then even from a competitor standpoint, a lot of young people, you talk about longevity, they don't care. You say you'll be good at jiu-jitsu, you'll win tournaments, they'll listen. But from a competitor standpoint, it's more likely that they're going to win.
Excellent. And can I just say one thing too? This is absolutely the very first G-rated episode we've ever done because I've gone the whole episode not said
Fucktard.
Bum, bum. Sorry.
Where's that bump, 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 bump?
Yeah, no worries. So whenever I'm on a podcast, I'm like, well, is this like a no cursing? So I just usually keep it real. Anyway, it's good.
Well, if you ask one of us, we wish it were.
Yeah, and the other one says, no way. We were trying to do a PG episode the other day because we had Rachel's eldest and my youngest on. And honestly, I went the entire episode and didn't say one word and got right to the last 3 minutes and dropped out the F-bomb and lost it. So I went from being a G-rated to a PG-rated. Never mind. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and to learn about your programs. And, look, I've had a deep dive into you. I've had a look across your websites and everything, and I've looked at a lot of the stuff you've got coming up across Instagram. And I've also listened to a couple of podcasts that you've been on historically as well. And I got to say, anybody out there that listening, I can assure you that Mike knows his stuff and you're absolutely worth the time to get in contact with and have a look at some of these programs. So, I hope many, many listeners out there make contact with you because of this episode as well.
And there's just so much gold on your Instagram page that you put out, so much free information. And that's, excuse me, that's what I really love about it is, if you don't want to fork out money or you can't because time's tough or whatever, even if you just follow along with Dr. Kickass on his Instagram, you will get so much knowledge, free knowledge, just, handed out to you for your own longevity and health and all of that sort of stuff. And it says a lot when we've got, a doctor who's, in emergency and seeing injuries all the time and stuff like that, who trains at our academy, and he's sharing your content in our members group all the time and saying, watch this guy and look at this stuff and this is actually really cool and you should be paying attention to this. So it really does. So thank you so much for putting your afternoon aside for us today.
Or morning for you.
No, it's afternoon
for you.
It's
I'm in the wrong country. Yeah. If you ever get down to Australia, will you come visit us?
Where in Australia are you?
We're just north of Sydney, so about a 45-minute, 50-minute drive from Sydney. Beautiful Central Coast, so many beaches and tracks and wildlife and the Australian Reptile Park.
That's it. Lots to see and do, and a really, really cool jiu-jitsu academy.
Very good. Well, my wife has wanted to visit Sydney, so it's definitely in the realm of possibility for sure.
Beautiful.
Make sure you stay in touch with us.
And if you do, we'll get you in and you can even do a little seminar or a class or something for us and
that'll be awesome.
Fund your trip.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for having me. High praise and hopefully we talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Take care, Mike. Thanks for being with us.
All right.
You have a good one.
If you like what you hear,
like, share, subscribe.
Absolutely.
Do it all. Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
This podcast is a My Broken Soldier production.
And brought to you by Iconic Jiu Jitsu.